The day before a wedding is meant to be full of nerves, laughter, and little moments that families hold on to for the rest of their lives. For me, though, it carried a different weight. I stood at the back of St. Andrew's Chapel, the air heavy with flowers and candle wax, watching as my daughter Emily rehearsed walking down the aisle. She looked radiant, every bit the young woman her mother and I had hoped she'd become. But even as pride swelled in my chest, something else pressed against it, an unease I couldn't quite shake. Derek Whitmore, her fiancé, had the kind of confidence money can buy. He carried himself with sharp suits and sharper words, smiling for the crowd yet sneering in the quiet moments. I noticed the way he adjusted his tie like the world should stop and admire him, or the way he gave directions to the wedding planner as if he were commanding troops. Still, I tried to quiet my doubts. This was Emily's choice. My job as her father was to support her. When the rehearsal wrapped, the families gathered near the altar for introductions. Derek's parents were polished, their every gesture rehearsed like a dance. Richard Whitmore, the patriarch, shook my hand firmly, his gaze sharp but not unkind. His wife, elegant in pearls, offered a smile that carried little warmth. "We're delighted to welcome Emily into our family," she said smoothly. I nodded, my palms still rough with years of factory grease no soap could scrub away. "She's a good girl. Always has been." It was then that Derek placed his arm around Emily's shoulders, not gently, but like a man reminding the room who she belonged to. His smile was picture perfect, but when Emily tried to step aside to fix her dress, his grip tightened just slightly, subtle but unmistakable. The rehearsal dinner followed at a downtown restaurant. The Whitmores had chosen an upscale place with white linen and waiters who seemed trained to look down their noses at anyone without a gold watch. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, listening to toasts and polite laughter. Emily sat beside Derek, her smile bright but forced. Every now and then her eyes flicked to me across the table as though searching for reassurance. I raised my glass, smiling back, though my heart ached. As the evening wound down, Derek leaned close to Emily and whispered something. She stood, excused herself politely, and made her way to the restroom. I watched Derek's eyes follow her, not with tenderness, but with a cold calculation that twisted my stomach. When she was gone, he leaned back in his chair, scanning the table as if taking inventory of possessions. His gaze landed on me, lingering. For a fleeting second the mask slipped. His smile faded into something harder, sharper, a look that said more than words ever could. "She's mine now," his eyes seemed to say. When Emily returned, Derek rose smoothly and took her hand, pulling her away from conversation. The gesture was quick, almost dismissive, as if no one else at the table mattered. My daughter followed, her smile faltering for just an instant before she recovered. I sat there, silent, feeling a chill creep into my bones despite the warmth of the room. That night, back at home, I found myself pacing the living room. Emily had chosen Derek, and I reminded myself again that it was not my place to dictate her happiness. But as her father, as the man who had promised her mother on her deathbed that I would always protect our little girl, I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. Derek wasn't just confident, he was controlling. And the way he looked at me, the way he gripped Emily's arm, the way he claimed space in every room he entered, it all painted a picture I could no longer ignore. I sat down heavily in my worn recliner, running a hand over the armrest polished smooth by years of use. My heart ached with pride for Emily, yes, but also with a dawning fear. Tomorrow was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. But if what I suspected was true, it might also be the first step into something far darker. And though I didn't know it yet, tomorrow would also be the day Derek Whitmore showed me exactly who he really was, and how far he was willing to go to prove that in his world, men like me had no place at the table. The next afternoon, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Andrew's as the wedding party gathered again, this time for final preparations. The air smelled of lilies and polished wood. People buzzed around the chapel, tying ribbons, arranging flowers, checking programs. I arrived early, hoping to find a quiet moment with Emily before the crowd descended. But Derek was already there, surrounded by groomsmen like he was the star of the show. His laughter carried too loud in the echo of the church, bouncing off the walls as though demanding everyone's attention. Emily caught sight of me across the aisle and hurried over, her face brightening. "Dad!" she said, hugging me tightly. For a moment, all my worries faded. In her eyes, I saw the same little girl who used to run barefoot across our backyard, scraped knees and all. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I whispered. She smiled, but her gaze flickered toward Derek, who was watching us closely. "Thanks, Dad. I'm glad you're here." Soon the planner called everyone to their places. Bridesmaids adjusted their dresses, groomsmen lined up, and I was guided to a chair in the front pew, my seat of honor as father of the bride. I lowered myself carefully, my knees not what they used to be, but just as I began to sit, the chair slid out from beneath me. My body dropped like a stone, slamming onto the polished wooden floor with a crack that echoed through the chapel. Gasps rippled across the room. My elbow throbbed from the impact, but the sting in my chest burned hotter than any physical pain. Above me, laughter broke out. Derek's laughter. He leaned casually against the pew, smirking down at me. "Careful, Frank," he drawled. "Reflexes aren't what they used to be, huh?" The groomsmen chuckled nervously, unsure whether to join in or stay silent. I pushed myself up slowly, ignoring the ache in my hip, forcing my face calm. My pride was screaming, but I would not let him see me break. Emily rushed forward, kneeling beside me. "Dad, are you okay?" Her eyes flashed with anger as she glanced at Derek. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I muttered, brushing off my suit and forcing myself upright. "Just fine." But as I stood, Derek leaned close, his voice low enough only I could hear. "Know your place, old man. This is my stage now." The words cut deeper than the fall. I clenched my jaw, staring into his smug expression. For the first time, I saw him without the polished mask, without the charming veneer. This wasn't a man in love with my daughter. This was a man who needed to dominate, to control, to remind me that in his world, I was nothing. Emily helped me back into my seat, her hands trembling slightly. I squeezed them, forcing a smile. "It's all right," I said softly, though my insides churned. The rehearsal continued, though whispers followed me wherever I walked. Guests shot sympathetic glances, some pretending they hadn't seen, others murmuring to each other behind raised hands. I kept my shoulders squared, refusing to show the humiliation gnawing at me. When it ended, I left quietly, retreating to my truck, parked under the fading sun. I sat there for a long while, staring at the steering wheel. Derek's words echoed in my mind. "Know your place." My place? I thought bitterly. My place had always been by Emily's side, from the day she was born. My place was working 12-hour shifts to put food on the table, patching her bicycle tires, paying for her college, holding her when she cried. My place was never beneath him. As I drove home, the ache in my hip throbbed with every press of the gas pedal. But the deeper ache came from somewhere else, a growing awareness that Derek's cruelty wasn't random. It was a warning shot. This wasn't the last time he would try to put me on the floor, and next time, I feared, he wouldn't be aiming only for me. That night, sleep did not come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Derek smirk, heard his whisper, "Know your place." My hip ached from the fall, but it was my pride that hurt the most. I tossed and turned until finally, in the small hours of the morning, I gave up and padded downstairs to the kitchen. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed in on you. I set a kettle on the stove and sat at the table, my hands folded in front of me. They were scarred and calloused, each mark a reminder of decades at the shop. My whole life had been spent working with these hands, fixing engines, tightening bolts, patching up whatever broke so that Emily and her mother never had to go without. I stared at them now, lit by the weak glow of the kitchen lamp, and thought about the woman who had once held them every night. Evelyn. It had been almost 10 years since she passed, but her memory clung to this house like sunlight on old curtains. I could still hear her laugh when I closed my eyes, see the way she'd brush flour off her apron while making biscuits on Sunday mornings. She had been the glue that held us together, the heart of this family. I remembered the day she got her diagnosis. The doctor spoke in careful tones as if soft words could soften the blow. She knew, though, Evelyn was sharp to the very end. When we got home from that appointment, she sat me down right at the same kitchen table and placed her hand on mine. "Frank," she said, her voice steady, "promise me one thing. Promise me you'll always protect Emily, even when she's grown, even when she thinks she doesn't need it. Be her anchor." I had swallowed hard, nodding as tears blurred my vision. "I promise." And I meant it, with every fiber of my being. The kettle whistled, pulling me back to the present. I poured myself a cup of tea and stared out the window into the dark yard. Emily's laughter used to fill this place. She'd ride her bike in circles on the cracked driveway, while Evelyn and I watched from the porch. I taught her how to change a tire out there, her small hands fumbling with the wrench, grease smudged across her cheek. She had looked up at me, grinning, proud of herself. Those memories pressed down on me now like a weight. I thought about how Derek had looked at me, how he had gripped her arm at the rehearsal, how he had yanked the chair away just to see me fall. Was I honoring Evelyn's wish? Was I protecting Emily, or had I already failed her? I wanted to believe Emily saw through Derek's arrogance, but love, especially young love, can blind a person to the sharp edges hidden beneath charm. Derek knew it too. That's why he flaunted his control, why he whispered threats only I could hear. He was daring me to stand against him. I took a long sip of tea, the bitterness burning down my throat. Protecting Emily didn't mean putting fists to Derek's jaw. It didn't mean storming into her life and demanding she leave him. That would only drive her further away. No, protecting her meant something harder. Patience. Watchfulness. Waiting for the moment when the truth could no longer be hidden. Still, I couldn't shake the fear gnawing at me. What if I waited too long? What if by the time Derek showed his true colors, it was already too late? The clock ticked on the wall, steady as a heartbeat. I closed my eyes, letting Evelyn's face fill my mind, her calm smile, her steady gaze. "I won't fail her," I whispered into the quiet kitchen. "I won't fail you." The promise I had made all those years ago burned fresh in my chest, fiercer than ever. Whatever Derek had planned, whatever games he played, I would be ready. I had survived factory floors, sleepless nights, grief, and years of raising a daughter on my own. I would survive this too. For Evelyn, for Emily, for the vow I had never once broken. 2 nights later, I found myself tugging at the collar of a shirt that suddenly felt too tight. Emily had insisted I join her and Derek for dinner with his family at one of the city's fanciest restaurants. She said it was just a casual get-together before the big day, but nothing about that place was casual. The building itself looked like a palace, glass chandeliers glowing above marble floors, waiters in crisp jackets moving like shadows. I felt out of place the second I stepped through the doors. My boots, though polished, squeaked faintly on the glossy tile. I caught a few glances from staff, the kind that said, "You don't belong here." Still, I held my head high. This was for Emily. We were led to a long table near the center of the dining room, already set with sparkling silverware and folded napkins that looked like origami. Derek sat at the head of the table, naturally. Emily slipped in beside him, her smile polite but faint. Across from them sat his parents, Richard in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my truck, and his wife in diamonds that seemed to glow under the lights. I took a seat at the far end. A waiter poured wine into crystal glasses, and conversations hummed politely. The food was exquisite, small portions arranged like artwork, each bite more delicate than the last. I ate quietly, grateful for the brief moments when Derek wasn't talking, but of course he never stayed quiet long. Halfway through the meal, the check arrived, slipped discreetly onto a silver tray. The waiter set it down in front of Derek. For a moment, Derek kept talking, ignoring it. Then, with a deliberate movement, he slid the tray across the table. The thin slip of paper stopped, right in front of me. The table fell silent. Forks clinked softly against plates, then stilled. Derek leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine lazily. "Tradition says the bride's father covers the rehearsal dinner," he said, his tone smooth, but laced with steel. His smile widened just slightly. "Seems only fitting, don't you think?" Heat crept into my face. I glanced down at the check. $347. Nearly half my pension check gone in one meal. I swallowed hard. Richard cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably, but he didn't intervene. His wife sipped her wine as though nothing unusual had happened. Emily's eyes darted to me, wide and pleading, silently begging me not to make a scene. I forced a smile, my hands steady though my stomach churned. "Of course," I said quietly. I pulled out my worn wallet, slipping out my card with deliberate calm. The waiter took it without hesitation, vanishing into the shadows. Derek raised his glass. "To family," he said. The others echoed him, though their voices lacked conviction. I lifted my glass too, though my throat felt tight. The conversation resumed, but I hardly heard it. My thoughts were roaring too loud. This wasn't about money. Derek knew I couldn't easily afford this. That's why he did it. It was a test, a demonstration, like a dog marking territory. He wanted me humiliated, reminded that in his world, power wasn't earned by sweat and calluses. It was purchased. I kept my expression calm, even as anger simmered beneath my skin. When the meal ended, I excused myself quickly, shaking hands stiffly before heading out into the cool night air. I breathed deeply, the crisp wind filling my lungs, steadying me. As I walked to my truck, Emily caught up, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Dad," she said softly, gripping my arm, "I'm so sorry. That was wrong." I placed my hand over hers, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Don't worry about me, sweetheart. I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. Not at all. As I drove home, the city lights flashing past the windshield, Derek's smug grin haunted me. The fall in the chapel had been bad enough, but this was worse. Because it wasn't just a prank, it was a statement. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me that it wouldn't stop here. The days leading up to the wedding blurred together. Guests began arriving from out of town. The chapel bustled with last-minute arrangements, and Emily was swept up in fittings and rehearsals. She called me each evening, her voice tired but sweet, assuring me everything was on track. But I knew better. The unease that had settled in my chest wasn't leaving. If anything, it was growing heavier. On Friday night, 2 days before the ceremony, I drove to Emily's apartment to drop off some family photos she wanted displayed at the reception. The place was lit up, voices drifting down the hallway as I approached her door. I paused when I reached it, my hand raised to knock. That's when I heard Derek's voice. It wasn't the smooth, charming tone he used in public. This was sharper, colder, like a knife being drawn across stone. "Yeah, it's all locked in," he said. "She's on board, no questions asked. Once the papers are signed, everything's set." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Of course she's valuable. She's not just some girl. I mean, her family name has pull in this town, even if her old man's a washed-up mechanic. Marrying her isn't about romance. It's about positioning. She's an asset, a step up. That's how you play the game." My stomach dropped. I pressed myself against the wall, every muscle rigid. His voice carried through the thin door. each word like a hammer driving nails into my chest. She'll get what she wants. Security, comfort, all that nonsense. But me? His tone hardened. I get control. That's the point. A man builds his empire one acquisition at a time. Emily's just another piece of the board. My fists clenched, knuckles whitening. I wanted to burst through the door, to throw him against the wall and demand he take it back. My daughter, my Emily, reduced to a business deal. But I stayed still, breathing slowly, forcing myself to remember what mattered. The truth was more powerful than any outburst. If I confronted him now, Emily might think I was exaggerating or worse, trying to sabotage her happiness out of pride. She was blinded by what she thought was love. She needed to see Derek's true self with her own eyes. I waited until the conversation ended, footsteps moving deeper into the apartment. Only then did I knock lightly. Emily answered, smiling when she saw me. "Dad, you're early?" I forced a smile, hiding the storm boiling inside me. "Just thought I'd drop these off before it gets too hectic," I said, handing her the photos. She hugged me warmly, her joy genuine. But as I glanced past her into the apartment, Derek stood in the background, phone still in his hand. His eyes met mine, and for the briefest moment, his smile slipped. He knew. He knew I'd heard. And the look he gave me wasn't one of guilt. It was a challenge. "Go ahead, old man," his eyes seemed to say. "Tell her. See if she believes you." Emily pulled me inside, oblivious to the tension crackling between us. She fussed over the pictures, talking excitedly about where they'd go at the reception. Derek slipped past us, placing a hand on her shoulder, his mask sliding back into place. "Thanks for bringing those, Frank," he said smoothly. "We appreciate it." I nodded, my jaw tight. Anything for my daughter. That night, as I drove home, Derek's words echoed endlessly in my head. She's an asset, a step up, an acquisition. It wasn't about love. It was never about love. For the first time, I stopped worrying only about my dignity. I began to fear for Emily's future. And I swore to myself, before those vows were spoken, she would know the truth. Saturday morning broke gray and heavy, the kind of sky that seemed to press down on the earth. I was in the garage, sorting through a box of old tools, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A sleek black car slid to a stop at the end of my driveway. The door opened, and Derek stepped out. His suit jacket hung open, his tie loose, as if he had somewhere better to be, and I was just a detour. He didn't knock. He didn't even pause. He walked straight up to the house like he owned it. I set my wrench down and wiped my hands on a rag, my chest tightening. "What do you want?" I asked, standing in the doorway of the garage. Derek smirked. "Just a little chat. Man to man." He brushed past me and stepped into the garage without waiting for an invitation. He looked around at the dusty shelves, the old lawn mower in the corner, the half-finished projects gathering rust. His lips curled. Cozy, real salt-of-the-earth stuff. Emily must have loved growing up here. I folded my arms. "Say what you came to say." He turned, his eyes sharp. "You heard me the other night." I didn't respond, but I didn't need to. The silence was enough. "Good," he said with a shrug. "Then let's not play games. You know what this marriage means. For me, for Emily, she gets stability. I get leverage. Everyone wins, except you maybe." My jaw clenched. "Emily isn't leverage. She's my daughter. She deserves better than—" He cut me off with a laugh. "Better? You think you can define better? Look around, Frank. This garage, this little house. Your pension checks stretch thin every month. This is mediocrity. Emily deserves to rise above it, and with me, she will." I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. "With you, she'll lose herself." His smirk faltered for just a second before he leaned in, close enough that I could smell the cologne on his collar. "Here's the thing, old man. Emily's not going to listen to you. She loves me, or at least she thinks she does, and when it comes down to it, she'll choose me every time. You're just a relic of her past." I stared into his eyes, unblinking. "Don't test me." His grin returned, thin and cruel. I don't need to. Tomorrow she'll stand at that altar and say yes, and when she does, you'll be nothing but a shadow in the background. She'll be mine, and you'll still be here, tinkering with your tools, telling yourself you matter. My hands itched to grab him, to shake some decency into him, but I didn't move. Not yet. Finally, Derek straightened his tie, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. Enjoy the wedding, Frank. Just remember, it's not about you anymore. Your place in Emily's life ends tomorrow. He walked out of the garage, his footsteps deliberate, his car engine roaring to life as he sped away. I stood there, the silence rushing back in like a wave. My fists were clenched so tight my knuckles ached. For a long moment, I just stared at the old workbench in front of me, the scratches carved into the wood over years of labor. I remembered Emily, a little girl sitting right there, swinging her legs while I showed her how to sand down a board. I remembered Evelyn leaning against the doorframe, smiling at us both. And now some arrogant boy thought he could erase all that, thought he could take Emily from me, not just as a daughter, but as a person. I exhaled slowly, letting the rage settle into something colder, stronger. He was right about one thing. Tomorrow would be a choice. But it wasn't going to be the choice he imagined. Because I wasn't going to let Emily walk blindly into a life built on lies. Not while I still had breath in my body. After Derek stormed off that morning, I tried to busy myself with chores, but my mind wouldn't settle. Every sound in the house seemed louder. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even the groan of the floorboards under my boots. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my jacket, climbed into my truck, and started driving. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than they should have, my knuckles pale against the leather. I didn't have a destination in mind, but my gut carried me 15 miles down the road to a little diner that hadn't changed since the 70s. And sitting in his usual booth, sipping black coffee, was Tom Jacobs. Tom and I had served together decades ago. He'd been a medic, steady as stone, even in the worst firefights. After the service, he became a truck driver, wandering from state to state, but always finding his way back here between jobs. We didn't talk every day, but when we did, it was like no time had passed at all. "Frank," he said as I slid into the booth across from him. His weathered face broke into a grin. "Figured I'd see you before the wedding circus swallowed you whole." I tried to smile, but it came out weak. Tom's eyes narrowed. "What's eating you?" The waitress poured me a cup of coffee, and I wrapped my hands around it, staring into the steam. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then the words tumbled out. "It's Derek," I muttered. "The boy isn't who he pretends to be. He's arrogant, manipulative. He humiliates me in front of others, then comes to my house and tells me I don't belong in my daughter's life." Tom leaned back, crossing his arms. "And Emily?" "She doesn't see it. Not yet. She loves him, or thinks she does. He hides the worst parts from her." I rubbed my temple, my voice lowering. "I overheard him on the phone. He called her an asset, a step up. He doesn't love her, Tom. He just wants what she represents. But if I tell her that now—" I trailed off, shaking my head. "She won't believe you," Tom finished. I nodded miserably. For a while we just sat there, the clink of dishes and low hum of conversation filling the space between us. Finally Tom leaned forward, his voice firm. "Frank, I've known you long enough to know your temper. You want to take him out back and knock the smug off his face." "You're damn right I do," I muttered. He chuckled softly. "But that's not how you win this one. You've got to let him hang himself with his own rope. Men like Derek can't help it. They expose themselves eventually. And when they do, everyone sees the truth." I frowned. "And what if by then it's too late?" Tom's gaze was steady, his eyes sharp. "You raised Emily right. She's smart. She just needs to see it without you forcing it down her throat. Trust that when the mask slips, she'll recognize what's behind it." His words hit harder than I expected. Tom tapped the table with a calloused finger. "You've been through worse, Frank. You've fought battles. where survival wasn't guaranteed. This one, this is patience. Hold your ground. Let him play his hand. And when the truth shows itself, be ready. I sat back, the tension in my shoulders easing just a little. Tom was right. My anger was a fire, but fire alone doesn't win wars. Strategy does. Patience does. I took a long sip of coffee, feeling the bitter warmth steady me. You always know what to say, I muttered. Tom grinned. Nah, I just know you, and I know you're tougher than that smug kid will ever be. When I left the diner an hour later, the weight in my chest felt lighter. Derek was dangerous, but he was also careless. Arrogance makes men sloppy, and when the moment came, I'd be ready. The night before the wedding, the Whitmore estate was alive with noise. Cars lined the long driveway, spilling guests in glittering dresses and sharp suits. Laughter echoed across the lawn, mingling with the faint strains of a string quartet playing under a canopy of lights. I stood off to the side near the edge of the patio, a glass of water in my hand. I'd never felt more out of place. The conversations around me swirled with talk of business ventures and vacation homes, words that might as well have been another language. Emily moved through the crowd with grace, her gown simple but elegant. She smiled when people congratulated her, hugged relatives she barely knew, nodded politely to Derek's colleagues. But I knew my daughter. Behind her practiced smile was something strained, something forced. I wasn't the only one who noticed. At one point, Derek joined her near the buffet table. She laughed at something a guest said, touching Derek's arm lightly. He brushed her hand off, not cruelly but dismissively, as if her touch interrupted him. His eyes stayed fixed on the men around him, his words aimed at their admiration. Emily's smile faltered for just an instant before she composed herself again. Later, I caught her slipping out onto the balcony. She leaned against the railing, staring into the night, the hum of cicadas carrying across the fields. I followed quietly, giving her space before I spoke. Big crowd, I said softly, stepping up beside her. She glanced at me startled, then sighed. Dad, I didn't even see you. I shrugged, taking in the view. Not really my kind of party. A small smile tugged at her lips. Mine either. We stood in silence for a while. The music inside swelled and faded, laughter spilling through the open doors. Out here, though, the air felt clearer. Finally, Emily spoke. Dad, do you ever feel like you're standing in a room full of people, but no one actually sees you? Her voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made my chest tighten. I turned to her, choosing my words carefully. Yeah, more times than I can count. She toyed with the bracelet on her wrist, her eyes distant. Derek, he's amazing, Dad. Everyone says so. He's confident, successful, handsome. But sometimes... She stopped, biting her lip. Sometimes I feel like I'm just standing next to him. Like I'm part of the picture he wants to paint. Not us, me. The words lodged in my throat, the truth burning to be spoken, because that's exactly what you are to him. But I remembered Tom's advice. Patience. Let him hang himself. I placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and gentle. Emily, a good partner doesn't just want you in the picture. They make sure the whole frame is built around both of you. You should never feel invisible. Her eyes met mine, glistening faintly. Mom used to say that, didn't she? I smiled sadly. She did. She believed in real partnership. Emily nodded slowly, then turned back toward the fields, silent again. Before either of us could say more, Derek stepped onto the balcony. His voice carried a hint of irritation. There you are. I've been looking all over for you. Emily straightened quickly, brushing at her eyes. I just needed some air. Derek slipped an arm around her waist, his smile polished for my benefit. Well, the party's inside. People are asking about us. As he steered her back toward the doors, Emily glanced at me over her shoulder. For the briefest moment, her expression wavered, something between uncertainty and apology. Then she was gone, swallowed back into the crowd. I stood there alone, the night air cooling around me. My heart ached for her, but at the same time, a flicker of hope stirred. She was beginning to see it. Not fully, not yet, but the cracks in Derek's mask were widening, and tomorrow, at that altar, those cracks would shatter. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, as though the heavens themselves wanted the day to be perfect. The church bells rang in the distance as guests filed into St. Andrew's, their laughter rising above the soft shuffle of dresses and polished shoes. I stood in the back, adjusting the lapel of my suit. My reflection in the glass door showed an older man, weathered but steady. My knees ached, my hands trembled slightly, but my heart held firm. Emily appeared in the bridal room, radiant in her gown. When she saw me, her face lit up. "Dad," she whispered, her voice catching. For a moment, my breath left me. She looked so much like her mother that I had to steady myself. "You're beautiful," I said, my voice low. She hugged me tightly. "Don't cry," she teased gently, though her own eyes glistened. The ceremony began, the music swelling as the doors opened. My arm trembled as I walked her down the aisle, but I kept my chin high. Every step was a reminder of Evelyn's promise that I would always protect Emily. At the altar, Derek waited. His smile was broad, but it didn't reach his eyes. He shook my hand stiffly as I gave Emily away, his grip firm like a man trying to prove something. The vows were spoken, the words echoing through the chapel. Yet even as Emily recited her lines, I saw the faintest hesitation in her eyes. She glanced at me once, as though searching for strength. I nodded, giving her all the courage I had left to give. After the ceremony, the reception hall glittered with chandeliers and music. The tables overflowed with food and wine, laughter filling the air. Derek was in his element, moving from group to group, shaking hands, boasting about future plans. Emily trailed at his side, her smile fixed but weary. I kept to myself near the edge of the room. That's when a deep, steady voice called my name. "Frank Miller?" I turned to see Richard Whitmore, Derek's father, approaching. His frame was tall and broad, his handshake strong, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, studied me closely. "You served in the army, didn't you?" he asked. I blinked. "Yes, long time ago." His expression shifted, softening with recognition. "I thought so. We crossed paths overseas, different divisions, but I remember your name. You were the one who patched up my convoy after it was ambushed. Saved a dozen lives that day." The memory rushed back. Dust, smoke, the sound of shells falling, and the desperate scramble to repair a crippled engine under fire. I hadn't thought of it in years, but I remembered. Richard clapped my shoulder firmly. "You're a damn fine man, Frank. I owe you." The words carried weight, and others nearby heard them. Heads turned. Suddenly the room's attention shifted, not to Derek, but to me. Derek approached, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Dad, we should be greeting the investors." Richard cut him off sharply. "Hold your tongue, Derek. Show some respect." The silence that followed was thick. Derek's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. "Of course, Father." Emily stood nearby, watching with wide eyes. Her gaze flicked between Derek's clenched fists and my calm expression. For the first time, doubt filled her face, not in secret, but openly, visible to everyone. As the evening wore on, Derek grew restless. The more attention Richard gave me, the more Derek seethed. He snapped at a waiter, barked at a bridesmaid, and even raised his voice at Emily when she hesitated during introductions. It was subtle, but enough. Guests whispered, eyebrows lifted. The mask was slipping, and this time, in front of everyone. I stayed silent, sipping my drink, waiting. Just as Tom had said, Derek was hanging himself. By the end of the night, the picture was clear. Derek wasn't the charming golden boy anymore. He was an impatient, arrogant man unraveling under his own pride, and Emily saw it. Her hand, once linked to his arm, now rested at her side. Her smile faded. Tomorrow morning, I thought, she would face a choice, and when she did, she would no longer be blind. The morning after the wedding, the Whitmore estate was strangely quiet. The celebration had ended in whispers, not triumph, and I could feel it in the air as I stepped onto the terrace for breakfast. The staff moved briskly, their eyes lowered, while guests murmured in hushed tones. Emily sat across from Derek at the long oak table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked pale, as though the weight of yesterday hadn't lifted but settled deeper. Derek, by contrast, was restless, snapping at the staff for lukewarm coffee, adjusting his tie even though no one cared. Richard entered the room, his presence commanding silence. He carried himself like a man accustomed to authority, and when he spoke, his voice left no room for argument. "Derek," he said, his tone cold, "your behavior last night was unacceptable. You embarrassed yourself. You embarrassed this family." Derek stiffened. "Father, with all due respect—" "With all due respect, nothing," Richard cut in sharply. "I watched you belittle your wife in front of guests. I watched you snap at employees, bark orders like a spoiled child. And I watched Frank Miller carry himself with more dignity in one evening than you have your entire life." The room fell silent. Derek's face flushed crimson. Emily's gaze lifted to her father-in-law, her eyes wide. "You saw it too?" she whispered. Richard nodded firmly. "Everyone saw it, Emily." The mask came off. Derek shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. "You don't understand? This marriage, this family, this is about more than feelings. It's about position, power, stability." The words tumbled out before he could stop them, raw and unfiltered. His voice rang against the high ceilings, echoing through the hall. Emily froze. Slowly, her expression hardened, the realization dawning across her face. "Position? Power?" Her voice trembled, but her eyes held steady. "Is that all I am to you, Derek?" A stepping stone. Derek's mouth opened, but no words came. She rose from her chair, her hands no longer trembling. "I thought you loved me." "But you never loved me? You loved what I could give you." Her voice broke, but she didn't falter. She turned toward me, her eyes brimming with tears. "Dad, I should have listened. I see it now." My chest ached, but I stayed still, letting her own strength carry her forward. Derek's desperation boiled over. He reached for her arm, but Richard slammed his hand down on the table. "Enough!" The word cracked like a gunshot. Emily stepped back, out of Derek's reach. "This marriage is over," she said firmly. "You may have fooled me once, but I won't spend my life being treated like an accessory in your empire." The silence that followed was deafening. Derek's face twisted, rage and humiliation warring in his eyes. "You'll regret this," he spat. "Both of you." Richard straightened, his gaze like steel. "No, Derek. The only one who will regret this is you." Derek's chest heaved, but he knew the battle was lost. With a final glare, he stormed out, the slam of the door reverberating through the hall. Emily collapsed into my arms, her shoulders shaking. I held her close, my heart breaking and healing all at once. "It's all right, sweetheart," I murmured. "It's over. You're free now." Richard approached quietly. He extended his hand, his voice low. "Frank, I owe you more than I can say. Not just for what you did years ago, but for what you've done now, for protecting Emily, even when it cost you." I shook his hand firmly, my grip steady. Emily pulled back, wiping her eyes. "What do I do now?" she whispered. I looked at her, at the strength flickering behind her pain, and smiled faintly. "Now, you live. You live the life your mother would have wanted for you, on your own terms." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting warm light across the estate. The storm had passed. For the first time in years, I felt Evelyn beside me, her voice, her smile, her steady hand on my shoulder. I had kept my promise, and in the silence that followed, I knew this wasn't just victory, it was justice.